Good afternoon. Bonjour à tous et toutes. My name is Min Kai Chun. I'm your host today and a board member of this Canadian Institute for Procurement and Material Management. I'm joined by my colleague Carolyn Landry, CIPIM Vice President, who will step in should any technical issue arise and I become disconnected. Thank you, Carolyn. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the third roundtable of our 2025-26 series, with today's discussion focused on outcome-based procurement. Bienvenue à notre troisième table ronde aujourd'hui sur les approvisionnements axés sur les résultats. Before we begin, I would like to remind all participants that CPIM roundtables are intended for procurement and material management professionals within the Government of Canada. Cette table ronde de l'IKGM s'adresse aux professionnels de l'approvisionnement et de la gestion du matériel du gouvernement du Canada. As we gather virtually, I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. For thousands of years, the Algonquin people have lived on, cared for, and supported this island, this land, long before the arrival of European settlers and the establishment of modern institutions. We recognize their enduring presence and honor their continued contributions, past, present, and future, to this region. Alors que nous nous réunissons virtuellement, je tiens à commencer par reconnaître que nous sommes rassemblés sur le territoire traditionnel et non cédé du peuple Anishinaabe algonquin. Depuis des milliers d'années, les Algonquins vivent sur ces terres, en prennent soin et en assurent la gouvernance, bien avant l'arrivée des colons européens et l'établissement des institutions modernes. Nous reconnaissons leur présence et continuons et honorons leur contribution passée, présente et future à cette région. I would like to note that our panel is pleased to respond to your questions and comments in either of Canada's official languages. You are encouraged to engage with the moderator and panelists in the language of your choice. Please also note that this session is being recorded and will be made available on the CIPIM website following the event for your reference. We are also using Wordly for live translation and captioning and would welcome your feedback. To access this feature, please click on the Wordly icon or select Wordly from the live drop-down menu in the upper corner of the Zoom window. Then choose your preferred language. Je tiens à préciser que les membres de notre panel se feront un plaisir de répondre à vos questions et commentaires dans l'une ou l'autre des langues officielles du Canada. N'hésitez pas à interagir avec les modérateurs et les panélistes dans la langue de votre choix. Veuillez également noter que cette séance sera enregistrée et sera mise à disposition sur le site web de l'IKGM après l'événement. Nous utilisons également Wordly pour la traduction et le sous-titrage en direct et nous apprécions recevoir vos commentaires. Pour y accéder, les participants peuvent cliquer sur l'icône Wordly ou sélectionner Wordly dans le menu déroulant live, situé dans le coin supérieur de la fenêtre Zoom, puis choisir la langue de votre choix. Before we start our panel and turn our focus to outcome-based procurement, I would like to share a few updates on upcoming CIPIM events. As mentioned earlier, this year's CIPIM roundtables are the result of a collaborative effort involving the Canada Revenue Agency, Environment and Climate Change Canada, Parts Canada, Share Service Canada, Global Affairs Canada, and the CIPIM team. We are sincerely grateful for the support of these valued partners whose collaboration enables CIPIM to deliver this roundtable to our PMM community. Please note that all participants will receive a follow-up email confirming their attendance at our roundtable. Next slide, please. Next one. I would like to highlight the upcoming 36th National Workshop, scheduled to take place from June 2 to 4 in Ottawa at our familiar venue, the Ottawa Conference and Event Center. We are proud to announce that this year, the Department of National Defense will serve as our premier partner. CIPIM has once again united an outstanding and committed team to design a powerful agenda that promises to inspire and engage. Participants can look forward to high-impact sessions on procurement and material management, complemented by enthusiastic and knowledgeable speakers, presenters, and panelists handpicked for this flagship event. This is a can't-miss opportunity to elevate your skills, expand your professional network, and reconnect with colleagues across the PMM community. Registrations remain open. but spaces are limited. J'aimerais souligner que notre 36e atelier national se tiendra du 2 au 4 juin à Ottawa, dans notre lieu habituel, le Centre de conférences et d'événements d'Ottawa. Nous sommes également très fiers d'annoncer que cette année, le ministère de la Défense nationale agira à titre de partenaire principal. Ne manquez pas cette occasion privilégiée de formation, de réseautage et d'échanges enrichissants avec vos pairs et l'ensemble de la communauté des approvisionnements et la gestion du matériel. Next slide, please. Next one. Ne manquez pas non plus l'occasion de participer à l'atelier de la gestion de la flotte qui se tiendra au 16 au 17 septembre prochain à l'hôtel Brook Street dans l'ouest d'Ottawa, ainsi qu'à l'atelier régional qui aura lieu le 5 novembre à l'hôtel Lord Nelson à Halifax. De plus amples détails seront communiqués sous peu. Don't miss the Fleet Management Workshop on September 16 and 17 at the Brook Street Hotel in West Ottawa, and the regional workshop on November 5th at the Lord Nelson Hotel in Halifax. More details to come. Next slide, please. About volunteering with CIPIM. CIPIM would not be able to offer high-quality events and programs without the help of numerous volunteers. Whether it will be sitting on the board or helping with one of our events, volunteering with CIPIM is an opportunity to make a meaningful contribution to our communities while networking with peers and industry leaders. Notre organisation ne pourrait pas offrir des événements et des programmes de haute qualité sans l'aide de nombreux bénévoles. Faire du bénévolat avec l'IKGM est donc une occasion de contribuer de manière significative à nos communautés tout en réseautant avec des pairs et des leaders de l'industrie. Final slide, please. I strongly encourage you to visit the CIPIM website for the most up-to-date information on upcoming events and other opportunities offered by the Institute. So now and finally, it is a pleasure for me to introduce Daniel Pilon, Director General of National Accommodations, Procurement, and Asset Management at Global Affairs Canada. Daniel joined Global Affairs Canada in 2018, bringing with him a wealth of procurement leadership experience gained through roles at Innovation, Science, and Economic Development Canada and the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. He began his career with the U.S. Department of Defense. We are grateful to Daniel for his continued leadership and advocacy on behalf of the procurement and MM community, and we are delighted to have him with us today. C'est un grand plaisir pour moi de vous présenter Daniel Pilon, directeur général d'approvisionnement, gestion des biens et planification des locaux à Affaires mondiales Canada. Daniel s'est joint à Affaires mondiales Canada en 2018, fort d'une solide expérience en leadership, en approvisionnement et en gestion du matériel acquise à l'ISDE et à la Commission canadienne de sûreté nucléaire. Il a débuté sa carrière au département de la Défense des États-Unis. Nous le remercions pour son rôle d'ambassadeur engagé et sommes ravis de l'accueillir aujourd'hui. Merci encore et à toi la parole, Dan.
Merci beaucoup, Minkai. Merci. So thank you. Welcome, everyone. Bonjour, collègues. Depending on where you are in the country and around the world, good morning or good afternoon. Thanks for joining us in this panel session on outcome-based procurement. So I'm going to date myself by saying, by using a reference to the A-team. So if you have a procurement problem and you need help, you call the A-team. And with me today, I have a veritable A-team of procurement specialist executives across a few departments of the Government of Canada that are going to share their knowledge and expertise on outcome-based procurement. So without further ado, let's go through the roll call of the A-team. So cue the music in your head for the A-team if you want. First of all, I have Guylaine Carrière. Guylaine Carrière is a renowned leader in procurement transformation. Her name, when you think of Guylaine, you also think about agile procurement and deployment of procurement transformation. Guylaine is joining us, and she's currently the Senior Director of Cloud Procurement Services at Shared Services Canada. She's an engineer by training, but she has over 25 years of experience in public procurement. Prior to joining SSC, Guylaine worked at the Canadian International Development Agency, now called Global Affairs, and Public Works and Government Services, as well as the Canadian Space Agency. Welcome, Guylaine. Deuxièmement, j'ai Nadine Clément. Nadine est actuellement la directrice des services de contrat à l'Agence de revenus du Canada. Elle est une professionnelle reconnue dans l'approvisionnement, comptant plus de 25 ans d'expérience, ayant œuvré dans des domaines complexes au sein du gouvernement fédéral. Avant de se joindre à l'agence, Nadine a occupé des postes de la haute direction à Services publics et Approvisionnement Canada, notamment à titre de directrice générale de l'approvisionnement et de l'application des logiciels. Elle a également été directrice adjointe à la Chambre des communes, où elle a dirigé la mise en œuvre de cadres d'approvisionnement négociés. Nadine est titulaire d'une maîtrise exécutive en administration des affaires et fait partie des premières diplômées du programme de spécialiste fédéral certifié en approvisionnement qui était parrainé par le secrétaire du Conseil du Trésor du Canada. Next, I have Jason Weatherby. Jason is presently the Acting Director General of Procurement Operations at Shared Services Canada. He is a senior federal executive with more than 27 years of leadership experience in complex IT procurement and digital modernization. At Shared Services Canada, he's led the organization of a group of about 160 employees and overseen over on average $3 billion in annual procurement. And he's delivering on major government-wide initiatives. He's known for his strategic insight and disciplined execution. Jason routinely advises senior executive on high-stakes procurement strategy, governance, and risk management. He has several TB submissions under his belt and is recognized for building a high-performing team, driving collaboration across departments, and delivering measurable results on complex, high-vis mandates. Jason holds a Master in Management Studies and a Bachelor of Commerce at Carleton University. Claudine Paquin is next and has been with Public Services Procurement Canada since January of 2008. Throughout her career, she has held a variety of roles within the acquisition branch, where she developed extensive expertise in planning, conduct, and management of complex procurement. In February of 2025, she joined the Procurement Transformation and Partnership Directorate, where she plays an active role in advancing procurement practices and supporting the Government of Canada's modernization priorities. Over the course of her 18 years of experience, Claudine has worked as a procurement officer in several areas, including communication and advertising, real property services, professional services directorate, and the pandemic response sector. She has also contributed to building organizational capacity by supporting the training and development of the procurement community for the last 2 years. A committed manager, Claudine is recognized for her ability to effectively align operational needs with the federal government's transformation objectives, while promoting collaborative and sustainable procurement approaches. So thank you, team. Thank you, my team of panelists. Merci beaucoup de vous joindre à moi. We're going to have an interesting session today, a lot to discuss about outcome-based procurement. So we're going to have a panel discussion that's going to last about 50 some odd minutes. We've got some questions that I would like to ask to the panelists in general. And then we're going to open up the Q&A session, but you can use the Q&A functionality right now to pose questions. But then for the last 20 to 25 minutes of the session, we'll go to the live Q&A and we'll answer some questions there that will be selected for the various panelists to answer. And that should take us to about 1:30. We'll wrap up the session. So looking forward to this. J'ai très hâte de participer avec vous dans cette session. On va avoir beaucoup de discussions intéressantes. Puis, ça va se dérouler, on a des questions préparées que je vais demander aux panélistes. Puis, après ça, on va passer à la session de questions et réponses qui va être directe. Puis, je vous encourage dès maintenant de mettre vos questions dans la session, dans la fonctionnalité de questions et réponses. Puis, les derniers 20-25 minutes, on va se tourner à ces questions-là qui vont être affichées. Puis, je vais poser les questions en votre nom aux panélistes. Ceci devrait nous apporter jusqu'à vers 1h30. Puis, après ça, on va faire la clôture de la session. So, that's a little bit of the administrative portion. So, I'm going to turn to my panelists now. Esteemed colleagues, first question as an icebreaker question. So we talk about outcome-based procurement. So I'm going to ask each one of you in your own terms, what is outcome-based procurement for you? What is it? So first and foremost, let's go to Claudine first. Claudine, pourrais-tu nous parler de c'est quoi pour toi l'approvisionnement axé sur les résultats?
Merci beaucoup, Daniel. Donc, pour moi, l'approvisionnement axé sur les résultats, ça représente avant tout un changement d'approche. On passe de l'achat de ressources, d'efforts, de temps à l'achat de résultats. On a eu recours de façon importante dans les dernières années à l'approvisionnement axé sur les tâches, où le gouvernement, dans le fond, définissait les activités, le fournisseur fournissait les ressources, puis le succès était mesuré en fonction de l'effort ou de l'activité fournie. Donc, l'approvisionnement axé sur les résultats va réoriente ce modèle-là. Le gouvernement définit le résultat à atteindre. Le fournisseur est responsable de concevoir et de livrer la solution pour y parvenir. Donc, au fond, l'approvisionnement axé sur les résultats repose sur la clarté de l'intention et la responsabilisation quant à l'atteinte des résultats, tout en donnant aux fournisseurs l'espace nécessaire pour proposer la meilleure approche possible.
Merci, Claudine. Let's go to Guylaine. Guylaine, on va passer à toi. Tes opinions ou tes commentaires sur c'est quoi l'approvisionnement axé sur les résultats. What is outcome-based procurement for you?
Thank you, Daniel. So for me, I mean, at the outset of all this adventure, I asked myself, Guylaine, if you would have not any constraint, what would be the ideal contract? So it's a contract that could be evolving. So you're not stuck with exactly what is prescribed at the stage of the solicitation. It's a contract that you have more than one vendor. Outcome-based procurement, for me, you have an integrated ecosystem, so you mitigate the risk of vendor lock-in. You have optimized operating procedures, so you don't have to compete. I should stop. And you can allocate the work in accordance with the business allocation process that was competed initially. It's a contract where you have a minimal level of bureaucracy, more effectiveness, and when you can have some specific socioeconomic measure. But for me, outcome-based contract, it starts when you design your solicitation. And in order to enable outcome-based contract, you must have competitive process that have the ability to change. Alors, d'avoir des processus compétitifs qui sont capables de faire face aux changements, aux situations imprévues. D'avoir une façon d'engager les vendeurs qui est interactive, mais qui n'est pas rigide. Genre, on demande la même question à tout le monde et on ne peut pas sortir de cette boîte-là. Donc, il y a une façon de faire ça. D'avoir la définition de ce que j'achète quand tu développes la sollicitation, qui n'est pas juste la pensée du gouvernement du Canada, des experts internes, mais qui est une collaboration, un co-draft avec les entrepreneurs. De faire du pushback sur nos équipes pour s'assurer que le niveau de bureaucratie est minimal. Le premier ministre l'a dit, on s'attend à des efficiences. Alors, c'est notre rôle de dire, OK, on n'aura pas un framework d'évaluation qui va avoir 100 critères d'évaluation. D'oser avoir une compétition financière agressive. Il y a des façons de faire, les vendeurs n'aiment pas toujours ça, mais il y a définitivement ça amène à des contrats qui sont vraiment des bonnes valeurs pour le gouvernement du Canada. Puis de sortir du paradigme que pour être équitable, il faut que j'évalue des pommes avec des pommes. Ça, c'est un mythe. J'arrête là.
Merci, Guylaine. C'est très bon. Tu nous donnes je vais vouloir explorer ça avec toi un petit peu plus tard là, durant le panel. Là. Tu donnes des bons indices. Let's go to Jason. Jason, do you have anything to add on outcome-based procurement and what that means for you?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Daniel. And good afternoon, everyone. And I do apologize for not having a fancy background. For those who know me, I'm pretty IT illiterate. However, I do know how to procure IT, just not use it. So OBP, it's not a new thing. What you're going to hear a lot of different perspectives on what it is, but it's been around a while. It's just hard to actually implement it. It's hard to break those patterns of doing the same old traditional thing. Focus on specifications and just repeating that each time a contract comes up for renewal. But it doesn't apply to every procurement. Obviously, there's many that it just doesn't make sense to use it on. If I look at the microcomputer space, We've got the National Master Standing Offer vehicle in place. And if you talk to the procurement manager there, Dan Hagar, he'll tell you that, it's a very effective vehicle. We have multiple OEMs on the vehicle. We run request for volume discounts off there, get great pricing, and ultimately the the client gets what they want, a good product in the end. Now, is that open to OBP? I don't know. We're actively looking at desktop as a service, so potentially, but there definitely are areas where it is applicable. And if you consider internally to the government, we have our IT specialists, and no discredit to them, they're super knowledgeable, but they have large portfolios. And when you're doing a specific solicitation for a requirement, perhaps they do not know everything about it. So why would we dictate to industry how to do that? And so in my opinion, you need to go out and give industry a chance to come back and tell you what's the best way to meet your needs. OBP is not easy. The reality is that it's very complex. It's definitely a transition from the usual way of doing it. So there's a lot of considerations to take into account, and just raising a caution sign that it is not an easy process, and that in often cases, that's why people don't pursue it. But I'll cover some of those issues and hurdles in a little more detail later.
Thanks, Jason. And it's really good that you've tied to the existing tools that are already in place, and so it'll be good. We'll talk about that a little later as well in the panel. Je vais me tourner maintenant à Nadine. Nadine, est-ce que tu as quelque chose à ajouter sur la définition pour toi de c'est quoi l'approvisionnement axé sur les résultats?
Merci, Daniel. Puis merci de l'invitation. Juste rajouter peut-être un peu, je suis d'avis avec ce que Jason dit, c'est pas un modèle qui s'applique à tous les approvisionnements. C'est un modèle que tu dois adapter selon ce que tu achètes et non à tous les approvisionnements. Mon expérience dans le passé était basée plus sur l'achat de solutions. Je pense que axé sur les résultats, ça pousse juste un peu plus loin que la solution. Moi, dans le passé, l'expérience avec les solutions, comme à l'agence, on a récemment changé le système d'appel, mais le client savait en partant que c'était un système d'appel qu'il voulait. De la façon que je l'aurais vu si on avait été axé sur les résultats, je pense qu'on aurait dit à la communauté des fournisseurs, l'agence recherche d'une façon de réduire le nombre d'appels par X montant, donnez-nous une solution. T'sais. Au lieu de préciser qu'on veut un système, la même chose que dans le passé, quand j'étais à PSPC, le client de service correctionnel savait ce qu'il voulait comme système. Il voulait un case management system pour gérer les Canadiens incarcérés du début à la fin. Mais encore là, pour moi, ça, c'était un approvisionnement axé sur la solution. Puis si je l'avais fait sur les résultats, c'est comme j'aurais ouvert la porte un peu plus, je pense, sur on cherche un outil à gérer un Canadien incarcéré du début à la fin sans dire qu'on voulait un case management system. Fait que moi, c'est comme ça que je le vois. Puis vraiment, c'est comme le nouveau buzzword, là. C'est comme ça. Puis moi non plus, j'ai pas de background, là. Je veux pas trop, comme je vous ai dit tantôt, m'annoncer que je travaille à l'agence. Fait que surtout en ce temps-ci de l'année. Merci.
Merci, Nadine. Je promets qu'on ne prendra pas de questions sur les impôts à cette session ici. Là, on va te protéger de cette façon-là. A very good comment from Nadine, though, of the delineation between outcome-based and solution-based. And the reason I mention it now is there's a question in the live Q&A about what is the difference between outcome-based and solution-based procurement. And Nadine talked about it. In a little bit of you want a solution, but what you're looking for is a slight difference. Is you're looking for an outcome, not necessarily a specific solution. You're looking for over at the end of the day a specific outcome which is not agnostic to or not specific to any given solution, right? So there's a subtlety there. So solutions-based is not necessarily outcomes-based, but there is links into that. And we'll explore that during the panel with my colleagues. Alors, merci beaucoup, collègues, pour tout. So let's move on to the next question. I'm going to pick on some of you for the next questions as we go along. So not all of you will get a chance to answer, but if you do have anything you want to add to your colleagues, please feel free to jump in. So the next question. Some departments have explored outcomes-based solutions more than others. So I'm going to pick a few of the panelists to talk about their recent examples on outcome-based or with outcome-based procurement, and how was it applied in your organization, and what were the results, and what did you learn, and what were the lessons learned from the experience? So specifically, let's go to Guylaine. Guylaine has a lot of ideas, and she's very experienced in the domain. So let's go to Guylaine and see if Guylaine can answer this. I'll just repeat the question in French. Alors, Guylaine, pourrais-tu nous partager quelques exemples en matière de l'approvisionnement axé sur les résultats que vous avez appliqués dans ton organisation? Puis, quels étaient les résultats reçus? Puis, les leçons apprises que les processus vous ont données. Alors, Guylaine, à toi.
Oui. Je vais vouloir partager un exemple qui vient de venir à maturité, c'est-à-dire qu'on est sur le point d'émettre les contrats et qui a fonctionné. Donc, c'est comment on compétitionne le prix d'une façon qui respecte pas juste les prix de liste, pas juste les discounts, mais aussi le prix du résultat. So, under cloud procurement, most of the time, the commodity, you have the price list, you apply discount. But if the price list is high, I mean, you can have a big discount, but you see the picture. So what we did, and it's aligned with the CFR, the Canadian Framework Review, and the international best practices that we put in place a cross-functional team, they develop a complex scenario, a use cases, 3 use cases. So the first time we engaged the vendors, we imposed their volume discount on everything. Vendor came back and said, ça marche pas de même, moi, là. Ma business n'est pas structurée comme ça. Toi, Canada, tu m'imposes des discounts là-dessus. Je peux pas te dire ça, c'est pas ma réalité. So Agile Procurement enable us to let them factor their own business discount structure. So that means just there, you can see that I'm not assessing everybody the same way, but it is still fair because they have the same opportunity to factor the discount. So we did that. And what it gave us in terms of financial evaluation, it gave us the price, not only of the volume discount on everything I'm about to buy, but the price of the real use cases, comment ça va me coûter, puis les comparer. And we were able to say, okay, this vendor is more like from a price, is more effective from a price. The other example that I could offer is, and we challenge ourselves to think outside of the box and outside of an agile procurement. Fait qu'une affaire qu'on a faite qui est vraiment pas pire, franchement, qui donne des bons résultats, c'est qu'on a mis une certification dans la sollicitation qui a dit, ben là, les discounts que tu vas me donner, ils vont s'appliquer sur les véhicules existants. So we said, okay, this certification, you sign this certification, so the competed volume discount would apply to the future, but I want you to agree that those discounts would apply on the existing vehicle during the transition. So through the agile procurement, they pushed back and they said, oh, no, you know what? You cannot impose that on us. Fine, we don't impose that. So we convert a mandatory certification in a score. So you have 2 points additional financial if you agree to sign this certification. Results is, Daniel, qu'est-ce qui est arrivé? La majorité l'ont signé. Mais ça fait que j'ai plus de pression de prix pour faire la transition parce que mes discounts compétitifs du contrat s'appliquent déjà dès que je signe le contrat. So this is an example of if you get good outcome-based contracting, you have to factor that when you design your solicitation.
Très bon point. So it's really interesting to see how you applied the concept of agile procurement to get an outcome-based solution, right? So very, very interesting, because in people's mind, these various solutions are one or the other. I'm either doing agile or I'm either doing outcome, and it's not necessarily the case, right? There are various, you can apply agile methodology to get to an outcome-based solution. So very, very interesting, and your lived experience there and your lessons learned. Let's go to the other pro in the team, Jason. Let's go to Jason and ask, okay, same question. So your experience in your organization with outcome-based procurement, and what were the lessons learned, and what did you achieve?
Yeah, apologies. My IT knowledge coming into play again. I have two screens going. I literally have to go out that side to come in this side, so delay on the mute. So yeah, I would agree. Agile and outcome-based, they're not mutually distinct. There is a lot of overlap. Obviously, Guylaine is the queen of agile procurement. I did have a couple quick examples, but I want to talk about some of the issues you have with traditional procurement, lessons learned there, leading to a preference for OBP. So two quick examples. We had this digital display network for ESDC. Basically, we went away from specifications and came out with a problem statement with some very high-level expected outcomes. Really good procurement, had multiple vendors come in, showed interest. They ended up demoing their solutions. We awarded 3 contracts for prototypes, and then based on how that evolved, we chose one to move forward. Second, next generation litigation software was for a secure file transfer solution. Same thing, we issued a challenge-based solicitation, basically focused on 4 very high-level outcomes. A lot of interest, really good results, and we ended up with a contract for a solution that we were very happy with. So a couple examples of where it's worked out. Going to talk about a few that have not in the past. They weren't outcomes-based. It was traditional. I'm not going to name names on this file, but basically we had over 300 mandatory requirements, all in the shape of specifications. Obviously, it didn't go well. We had 2 failed solicitations before we had to actually reduce the mandatories down. Along with that was a number of rated criteria, which had a minimum bar you had to pass. So when you have that much mandatory criteria in play, obviously things are going to go wrong. And they did twice. And, you know, we had really good vendors in there and they did a good job of submitting bids. But ultimately, a vendor is eventually going to overlook something, or they're going to misinterpret what we're asking for, or they're going to come back and say, okay, here's the answer to that, but here's my spin on it because I think this is better and more efficient. So for various reasons, they were found non-compliant. So we had to really adjust it just to get a valid compliant bid in. Eventually we did, but a lot of lessons learned out of there. Then we look at, well, our pay system. I don't want to harp on that too much, but we had an approach. It didn't work out. Full Big Bang Theory. That was not the way to go about it. Fortunately, it's not an SSC procurement now, but the team has taken these lessons learned. They've adapted, they've moved forward, and they got a really good process in place. And I think we're going to have a lot of success in the future. So they've taken those lessons learned from it, and moved forward. So it's really important to, when something doesn't go right, learn the lesson, move on. And in most cases, for these types of solution, outcome-based is the way to go.
Thanks, Jason. A really good couple of practical examples there and lessons learned. A couple of things that I want to highlight of things you said. First, the concept of a challenge, right? A challenge procurement. So you go out there with the challenge function. You don't go out with a requirement. You go out with, here's my problem. Can you propose a solution? And that is, you know, it's outside of our traditional procurement comfort zone. But it is very, very much aligned to a process that is outcome-based, because you're saying, I have a problem, help me find a solution. So that's really, really good. I'll do a little shout out to my innovation, science and economic development colleagues that run the Innovative Solutions Canada program, which is a challenge-based program. And some of you in the procurement community have heard of that. And it's very much, it's an approach where the government outlines a problem and we ask for suppliers in the communities to give us solutions. not necessarily on how they're going to meet our requirements, but how can they propose a solution that would help us solve a problem. So that's the first and foremost. Second, interesting part, Jason, that you mentioned, and I want to concentrate on this in the one of the procurements that didn't go so well, and you identified like the 300 mandatory requirements. And I think the lesson there is, and the interesting thing is that although we have the best intention sometimes of putting all these mandatory requirements to protect ourselves as the government, it is a lot of times counterproductive. And it ends up with our supplier community that they miss something, or things are convoluted and they're too complicated because we put an overemphasis on those mandatory requirements. And your example there of failed procurement because partly related to those mandatories is very interesting as far as the lessons learned, right? So glad that you're here to share that experience with us. Okay, let's move on. So, traditional procurement is like a comfortable pair of shoes for us, right? So when we talk about defining requirements, and when we issue an RFP, we really like our tools in our RFPs that are, very prescriptive. It's what we know traditionally as procurement community. The tools, the older tools and the more historical tools were geared towards this requirements definition. A lot of what we have is like task-based, right? Our IMIT contracts, a lot of their used are task-based. So how do you get away from that? How do you take off those comfortable pair of shoes and explore something? So we're going to look, my next question to my panelists is, how do you avoid prescribing the how to suppliers? And still maintain the appropriate controls, right? So you still want to get a specific outcome, but you want to avoid how to tell suppliers to get there. And in your experience and working with industry, what kind of feedback have you gotten? And what are the topics that interest industry and suppliers when we go towards avoiding to defend or to define the how? So I'll repeat in French. Comment est-ce qu'on évite le pétrin de porter nos souliers confortables, de décrire le comment aux fournisseurs dans nos processus d'approvisionnement, puis de transitionner à un approvisionnement où est-ce qu'on cherche plus une solution? Puis je suis intéressé de savoir votre expérience avec l'industrie. C'est quoi la rétroaction que vous avez reçue avec l'industrie sur c'est quoi leurs défis, puis c'est quoi leur intérêt sur quand on essaie d'éviter de dire le comment dans nos approvisionnements pour se rendre à nos objectifs. Alors, je suis intéressé à vos opinions. Alors, on va commencer avec Claudine. Claudine, we'll start with you.
So with outcome-based procurement, we really have to avoid prescribing the how by shifting where control sits. Instead of controlling activities or processes, we have to focus on controlling outcomes, performance, and accountability. So that starts with being as clear as possible about what success looks like. And our control points become then, clear outcomes, measurable key performance indicators, acceptable quality level, and objective verification methods. So at the same time, we clearly separate non-negotiables like, accessibility, compliance, official language requirement, data sovereignty, architecture constraint, and so from the solution itself. And then everything else is intentionally left open, so suppliers have room to innovate and propose their own approach. And so by relying on clear standards and performance indicators instead of, detailed instructions, we hold suppliers accountable for the results. And so they are not accountable for following a prescribed script. And so finally, governance is key. We focus on regular oversight, discussions around results, around deadlines, not on micromanagement. And so we don't lose control by avoiding the how. We simply exercise it differently through outcomes and evidence of performance. And, my division have conducted an RFI. Recently, we received about 72 responses. We conducted 50-something one-on-ones. And suppliers are eager to have a better understanding of the results that we need, that we're looking for. So yeah, they want that. And as it was mentioned by other panelists, it's very on very specific requirement that it is possible to be clear on those results. So it's not a one size fits all. Thank you, Danielle.
Merci, Claudine. Passons à Nadine. Nadine, j'aimerais avoir ton opinion sur ce sujet-là.
Oui, j'ai pas beaucoup de choses à rajouter de ce que Claudine a dit. Claudine a couvert beaucoup. Mais vraiment, faut définir qu'est-ce qu'on veut, puis pourquoi, puis s'enlever du comment le faire. Souvent, je vois des statements of work qui disent comme the supplier must, puis là, ils dictent exactement comment est-ce qu'ils doivent livrer la solution, puis tout. C'est ça qu'il faut s'enlever d'eux. Il faut donner la liberté, la flexibilité aux fournisseurs de nous dire comment ils vont résoudre notre problème. Je pense que ça va, en le faisant comme, puis comme c'est là, même moi ici à l'agence, on commence à l'appliquer petit peu par petit peu. Petit changement. D'avoir des critères moins prescriptifs, puis on le fait comme toute transparence, on prend un RFP qui est sur la rue comme c'est là, puis entre nous, on passe au travers pour voir si comment est-ce qu'on pourrait l'améliorer. On l'a fait récemment. C'est le fun comme exercice. Puis là, des fois, même dans le dernier cas, ça m'a tenté d'appeler l'agent et de dire tu devrais peut-être réviser ça ou poser des questions. Mais je pense que juste les critères, comme je pousse l'équipe à, comme Jason y a dit avec son 330, là, critères obligatoires, c'est quelque chose qu'à l'agence, j'ai remarqué qu'il y en avait plusieurs. Puis, ce que j'essaie de changer ici, c'est vraiment de réduire les critères obligatoires. Comme j'ai vu, là, the resource must be bilingual or the services must be rendered bilingual dans des critères obligatoires. Mais si tu l'as mis dans ton statement of work que le travail doit être fait bilingue, c'est fini là. On n'a pas besoin de le mettre comme critère obligatoire. Ou la même chose comme la sécurité, ça n'a pas d'affaire dans les critères obligatoires. C'est dans ton statement of work, puis c'est là que ça finit. Comme il faut que le travail soit fait dans les 2 langues officielles, puis ça finit là. Ce n'est pas un critère à évaluer. Fait que moi, juste en faisant ça, c'est la première étape que je le fais. Puis après ça, ben, on va commencer à explorer le outcome, là, mais je pense que c'est des petits pas qu'il faut commencer.
Merci, Nadine. Je suis intéressé de savoir si tu as regardé les contrats d'affaires mondiales dans tes exercices de pratique. Si oui, je suis très intéressé de savoir notre report card, comment on a évalué. Écoute, je vais me tourner à Guylaine maintenant. Guylaine, ton opinion sur ce sujet, sur comment éviter le comment faire aux fournisseurs.
Thank you, Danielle. So to me, it starts with the question, what am I buying? And how do we prescribe or describe the obligations of the contractor about what I am buying? And I would like to make a distinction between the procedural obligations and the technical things that they have to deliver under the resulting contract. So I'll focus just on the second. So in order to enable an evolving contract, we prescribe the scope. That is a problem statement that remains stable for the entire duration of the contract, could be 25 years. But the requirements to satisfy that scope or to resolve that problem will evolve. So the first requirement is the first thing I'm buying for the 5 years, for example. But in IT, innovation is everywhere. So if I'm prescribing something for 25 years, this contract would become obsolete after 5 years. So how am I describing the obligations of the contractor, what the contractor has to deliver, produce in terms of outcome? So we engage with the cross-functional team. And we start ironing out the minimum viable requirement, to echo what Claudine was saying. And after that, we engage the industry. And guess what? They told us, ce que tu dis là, c'est pas viable ton affaire, ça, c'est pas possible. Puis ils nous disent, sais-tu que déjà l'innovation, là, AI, on est rendu là. Si tu mets ça comme un requirement, c'est quelque chose que tu peux déjà exister. So how do we get away from the how? It's by engaging vendor, the industry incrementally. And my last point is about the needs definition is not something that is set a stone at the beginning of the contract in the solicitation. So that could be something in traditional procurement you do. I'm buying this, and after that, the contract say I'm buying that, and if ever you change by an amendment the scope of the contract, you're screwed because you're now in non-competitive territories. Oh my God, my contract becomes rigid. You want to avoid that. So you need to enchase in the way you evolve the contract and at the stage of the competitive process, how your contract will evolve. So that means that the needs definition could evolve. C'est ça que je scope, c'est ça que j'achète maintenant. C'est comme ça que mon besoin va évoluer, incrément 1, incrément 2, incrément 3. So needs definition doesn't stop at contract at the solicitation issuance.
Merci, Guylaine. Thanks. That's really fascinating. And you know what? I'm going to go into a hot pursuit on the next question. And I think I'm going to go back to you if you don't mind. So in the Q&A, there's kind of like questions related to this, and I want to focus on what you just said. So you talk a lot about flexibility in procurement and you know, in your method of approach. So talk to me about the difference between agile procurement and outcome-based contracting. Is there a difference? Do they go hand in hand? Are they competitive? You know, can we talk to me about that? You've got a lot of experience, and I want to get some wisdom. Alors, j'aimerais que tu passes un peu de temps de nous parler un peu de l'approvisionnement agile, dont tu es un expert, mais aussi de son lien ou est-ce que c'est en conflit avec la passation de marché axée sur les résultats. So, tu pourrais nous parler de ça un peu. Merci.
Oui. Ben, je vais donner ma perspective, mais je ne pense pas qu'elle ait été endossée par l'Université du Tout est parfait dans le monde. Puis j'avais eu une conversation là-dessus il y a plusieurs années avec Emilio Franco, qui est au Conseil du Trésor. Puis je disais, Emilio, est-ce que c'est agile qui est dans le outcome ou c'est le outcome qui est dans l'agile? Tu sais, je me posais la question, lequel est lequel? Pour moi, après ces années-là, d'avoir des processus d'approvisionnement qui ne sont pas bureaucratiques, qui sont capables de réagir aux changements, qui résultent dans des contrats qui donnent des vraiment bons prix pour le gouvernement, puis qui fait qu'on ne se ramasse pas avec des situations où on est pogné dans un contrat. Pour moi, ça, c'est les outcomes que tu peux caractériser. Fait que outcome-based procurement, il y a différentes façons d'atteindre les outcomes, puis agile, c'est juste une façon de faire. Il y a différentes. Pour moi, agile, c'est le art. C'est les principes agiles, c'est les techniques incrémentales de comment on fait ça. Et puis, c'est ma perspective, dans la différence. Donc, pour moi, agile est dans outcome.
Merci. Écoute, tu dis que c'est pas approuvé par l'université. À ma connaissance, tu es le professeur au gouvernement canadien de Agile Procurement. On se tourne à toi pour les avis et conseils parce que tu as beaucoup d'expérience. Alors, écoute, j'apprécie tes commentaires.
Je suis très, très d'accord avec toi. Tout ce que tu dis à mon sujet est tout à fait vrai et vérifiable.
So let's go to Jason. Jason, you also have experience in outcome-based procurement, and I know that your organization also does agile. So talk to me, if you can, about any differences or compatibility between agile procurement and outcome-based procurement.
Yeah, so I briefly touched on this earlier. They are not distinct processes. Outcome-based is obviously focused on an outcome and not prescriptive solution-based specifications, whereas agile is more iterative, reducing risk, providing evidence, and then moving towards large investments where it makes sense to do so. You can do outcome-based in an agile way, or you can do it in a traditional way. But I think there's overlap with the two. If I think back to, what I consider as one of the first agile processes at SSC, we did a collaborative procurement process. It was novel at the time, basically went out with a solicitation. High-level requirements came in, got a subset of vendors that met those, and then discussed the actual requirement with those vendors, one-on-one as a group, together, and we refined those requirements going forward. Now, it wasn't necessarily focused on an outcome, but it was an agile process. And ultimately, we went out with an RFP, solicited to those vendors, and the Q&A period was much reduced because we'd already talked through all the issues. So felt that was agile. Now, Guylaine's taken it to a new level with all her different processes. But yeah, it's you could use agile to do outcome-based, or you could do it in a different way. But outcome-based for me, it's not necessary for certain areas of procurement, like I mentioned microcomputers. If you look at M&S, doesn't really apply there in my mind. Same for certain software and hardware commodity buys that are very straightforward. I mean, it's pretty specific. But in other areas, if you talk to the cybersecurity manager, Jeremy Bigra, he'll tell you that in many areas of like networks and cybersecurity, these are fast changing areas, and you need to leverage what industry knows. You can't just go out and tell them, okay, this is what we need, this is how you're going to do it. You need to have that outcome base. Here, this is the outcome we are focusing on. We're challenging you to come back and tell us how to do it. So it's leading edge stuff, and that's where we need to really rely on industry to help us along with that.
Thanks, Jason. And I agree with you there. You know, we shouldn't assume that we in the government know the best way to get from point A to point B, right? Suppliers, our supplier communities, they are the experts, they're leading edge, and we should find and use tools like agile, but outcome-based procurement to try to get us to the best solution possible. So great comments so far. I'm going to go to the last questions to the panelists, and then after that we're going to switch to the live Q&A. There's questions coming in, but the last question that I have to a few of the panelists is, so for most departments, outcome-based procurement is still new, right? We're not doing it. A lot of departments still follow the traditional method of requirements definition and using tools like TBIPs and so forth that are very task-based oriented, where we prescribe. So for organizations that are interested in starting their journey in outcomes-based procurement, what are your recommendations on how they should tackle this, how they should start? Alors, j'aimerais vos commentaires, chers collègues, pour les organisations que c'est nouveau. C'est ce concept-là de l'approvisionnement axé sur les résultats. C'est quoi vos recommandations pour ces organismes-là, les ministères qui commencent ou qui sont intéressés à commencer ce parcours-là d'explorer cette option-là? Alors, je vais me tourner premièrement à Claudine. Claudine, over to you on your recommendations or advice to departments.
Thank you, Daniel. So my key recommendation would be to start small and build confidence over time. First, you should pilot and outcome-based procurement on a well-understood requirement, where expected outcomes are easier to identify. Early wins go a long way in building trust and buy-in. Second, invest time upfront in defining the problems and the outcomes. That means spending more effort on understanding the needs, the user needs, and success criteria than on detailed technical specification. Third, keep standards and governance simple. A small number of meaningful indicators combined with regular discussion on performance, that's going to be, far more effective than, complex frameworks. Finally, and I think this one is the most important one, is engage early on with, your procurement team and PSPC as a national center of expertise on professional services procurement that can, support with the transition from task-based to outcome-based. Both can play a key role in shaping the statement of work and the evaluation criteria, and waiting until everything is decided will significantly, I think, limit the value they can add. So keep in mind that outcome-based procurement is a cultural shift, and that the goal isn't to be perfect on day one. It's to learn, adjust as you go, and just, steadily mature.
Merci. So baby steps, right? Start small and learn, build on your successes. Great, great advice there. Let's go to Jason. Jason, what's your advice or recommendations to departments if they want to go down this path?
Yeah, I fully agree with what Claudine said. The key for me is that baby steps. Outcome-based, get the vendor in there, get them engaged, prove they can do it at a small level, and then grow it as you can. If there's issues, you can course correct and make adjustments. If you try and come out and do a big bang, all at once, well, that's going to have a lot of downfalls. Prove it can be done and then grow it as required. And Daniel, you and I talked about, okay, so who has the benefit here? Is it larger organizations or is it smaller ones? Some might think it's the larger ones, but from my perspective, I think it's the smaller organizations that are able to react quicker. They have more flexibility. They are also not as set in their ways. As I discussed, a lot of business lines are stuck in their ways, and it's really hard to convince them to move out of their comfort zone, try something new. But ultimately, if you're doing this, you need to focus on the needs of the organization up front. Like that's essential. Everyone has to come together, that early engagement. What are the needs? Then you put out that challenge to industry. Here's our high level outcomes. Come in, tell us how it's going to be done. It's vastly different from what we have done in the past. So there are going to be a learning curve for the organization, and probably in some of the solicitations. I mean, you need to judge performance as you go through it. So how are you going to do that? How are you going to measure it? You're going to have flexibility in delivery dates because you don't have it all prescribed, the deliverable by this date, deliverable. It's an outcome base. You're going to have to provide that flexibility. Things could take longer, but they could be done much earlier. And if it's done earlier, you both win. And risk sharing, I think that's really important because now you're putting the onus on them, but you haven't laid out exactly how they have to do it. So you're taking on that risk that they understand what you want and they're going to provide what you need in the end. And then, of course, payment. What are the payments tied to? It's not easily written. It's something that needs a lot of advanced engagement. So you need to focus on that up front. But ultimately, for outcome-based procurement, you need all that upfront planning and support. You got to have full commitment from the team. Often you need a champion if it's a really large procurement, and a very dedicated oversight team to keep it moving through as things progress.
Excellent. Great advice there. And also the interesting perspective of a large versus a small organization, right? In small organizations, we look to the larger ones in SSC, PSPC to test the waters and to establish processes, and then that we can then use and mirror. But it speaks to smaller organizations and their flexibility, and they could probably implement a lot of things in outcome-based procurement in a more agile manner because they are smaller and technically more agile. So it is an interesting perspective there, and an encouragement to small organizations that are listening here to take the plunge and not necessarily wait for guidance or policy from the center or from tried and true practices of the larger organizations. Smaller organizations have a role to play, they have a place, and they have a distinct advantages sometimes to try these things out. Thanks. Really good perspective, Jason. Passons maintenant à Nadine. Nadine, j'aimerais savoir tes opinions, tes recommandations et tes conseils que tu pourrais donner au ministère.
Ben, un peu comme Claudine puis Jason ont mentionné, il faut que tu commences petit. Pour moi, la méthode axée sur les résultats, c'est une façon de faire un approvisionnement. Ça fait partie de mon bagage d'outils que j'ai. Au début, je pense qu'un besoin est identifié. C'est de vraiment avoir les possibilités d'appliquer cette méthode-là. C'est pas une façon, une méthode qu'on applique automatiquement à tous les dossiers. Je pense qu'il faut cibler certains projets. Puis comme Jason dit, des petits projets. Puis de voir les résultats rapides pour avoir le buy-in de nos clients à l'interne autant que d'avoir les fournisseurs. Il ne faut pas avoir peur d'engager non plus l'industrie. L'industrie vont nous fournir beaucoup, beaucoup d'informations sur comment régler notre problème. Il ne faut pas avoir peur des... J'ai souvent, encore même, il y en a qui disent « Ah, ben je ne devrais pas... tu sais, comme appeler un tel fournisseur pour telle affaire, mais si tu les appelles tous, comme, c'est quoi le problème, comme? Si tu donnes l'opportunité à tous, un peu comme Guylaine a dit, tant si longtemps que tu donnes la même opportunité à tous, il n'y a aucun problème, comme. selon moi, là. Fait que vraiment, ça fait partie d'un des outils qu'on a, puis c'est de le mettre avec nos autres outils.
Merci, Nadine. Thanks, colleagues. Okay, this was the end of the prepared questions that I wanted to cover for you. Now is the true hot seat. So we're putting you on the hot seat. We're going to do rapid fire questions on the live Q&A. I'm going to go through the questions and I'm going to look at some of you to either volunteer or I'll pick you out to answer a few of the questions. On va passer à la session de questions et réponses en direct qui ont été affichées là, sous l'application. Puis je vais me tourner à mes panélistes pour répondre certaines questions. We won't have time to answer all of the questions. There's a lot. There's already 27 I see right now. But we are accumulating. I see in the chat that we are accumulating all the questions and we'll try to possibly share them in the future so that everyone can see it. Alors, passons maintenant aux questions-réponses. La première question que je vois, c'est can you please clarify the difference between outcome-based procurements and solutions-based? I think we've already touched that one. We touched it at the beginning of the discussion. So they're not, and Nadine expertly explained, the slight perception of the two and what the differences are. So we'll go to the next question. And the next question is, what is the hardest shift in moving to outcome-based procurement? The contract, the performance measures, the organizational mindset, and how have you seen organizations overcome this? So I'm going to look at my two panelists that have had a lot of experience in this. So we'll look at maybe Guylaine and Jason to see when you implemented outcomes, what was the hardest thing? What was the biggest challenge? So Jason or Guylaine, over to you.
Jason will take this question.
You got it. No, it was the shift in the organization to wrap their head around doing outcome-based procurement. I've been at SSC from the start, trying to get there all along the way, and it has been a monumental task. No disrespect to the business lines. Things were working okay. They, were set in their ways. They knew one way of doing things. It's so tough to get everyone on board to do something completely different. And you got to start right at the top. You have to have ADM level alignment that we're going to fix this. We're going to try something different. And that needs to trickle down. You have to have that alignment at the top, and he needs to get everyone below him on board. Once you have that, things can flow smoothly. Obviously, there's going to be bumps along the way, but if everyone's on board right from the start, that is key. You need to get everyone on board. You need to start defining your needs, which is going to lead to the outcomes that you want to see. If you don't have it, there's going to be conflict, disputes all along the way, and it's just not going to be successful. It's that change in attitude right from the start.
Thanks, Jason. Guylaine, Nadine, Claudine, anything else to add? Quelque chose à ajouter?
No.
Okay. All right. Merci. So let's go to the next question. So, and I think some of you talked a bit about this during the panel discussion. So the next question is, outcome-based procurements intentionally avoid over-specifying the scope, right? Because you're using the scope, but you're not being prescriptive in what they have to do. So, but how do you maintain cost certainty and prevent scope creep from driving uncontrolled cost growth? So some of you have talked about that a little bit, so I'm going to turn to the panelists again. Guylaine, tu avais mentionné un peu d'expérience avec les coûts, le pricing, les cédules. Alors, serais-tu prêt à nous donner un peu d'insight sur ça?
Sure. I think I would like to clarify first, clarifying the what I am buying, then how am I paying for it? You can have a flexible, evolving definition of what you are buying and a clear, objectively measurable basis of payment. To me, there's no link of dependency. And I'll give you the answer. The example of cloud procurement. Cloud procurement is a commodity where you have price lists, where you applied competed discount on those prices. I mean, outcome-based, the what are the cloud and So now we are AI that are included in the scope. And there's a lot of things in that, what I am buying, it's more than cloud. So that will evolve. But the basis of payment is pretty straightforward. So that doesn't mean that because the scope is evolving, nimble and variable, that your basis of payment must be that way. You can iron it out at the very level of having un clear, tu n'as pas le choix. Il faut que comment tu payes, ce soit clair.
Maybe
Merci. Yeah, Jason, and if you could also, the variation between an evolving scope and scope creep, right? Scope creep is a bad, in procurement is very bad. So, experience or the delineation between an evolving scope and scope creep. If you could touch on that and talk about pricing as well and costs.
Je ne sais pas c'est quoi un scope creep.
Scope creep, c'est quand le scope, tu as un scope de défini, puis là, il y a des ajouts plus tard qui fait que ton scope augmente par des ajouts. Souvent, c'est par l'intermédiaire d'un amendement ou plusieurs amendements, ou est-ce que ton scope initial a changé par la fin de ton contrat, tu fais A, B, C, D à la place de juste A.
C'est ça. Dans les agiles, on n'a pas cette préoccupation-là parce que vraiment, la portée du contrat, c'est de résoudre le problème puis d'atteindre les résultats, qui est à un niveau de la portée du contrat. Puis ce que j'achète va évoluer. Fait que je n'ai pas besoin d'amender le contrat. Il y a un mécanisme d'ajustement de ce que j'achète qui est intégré au contrat, donc c'est in scope, donc je n'ai pas besoin de l'amender. C'est un concept qui, je te dirais, pratiquement disparaît.
Yeah. Intéressant, Guylaine, merci. Let's go to Jason for your feedback on this as well.
Yeah, sorry, Daniel. I don't know how to raise my hand on Teams or on Zoom. I'm going to hear it. I know. So for me, I can see three ways of containing costs. The first is, and it's not often used, but sometimes you put your budget out there and you say, this is our needs, this is the outcomes we need, but this is the max budget. And so they bid towards that. The second is a regular solicitation. Everyone bids and you hold them to those prices. The third, and what I think is the most effective, is outcome-based. You have them come in, you do demos, maybe you award small contracts for a specific cost, and 3 of them get them. And then as long as those prototypes are working, then you go back out and you solicit for the remaining requirement. And you're going to have three vendors bidding. They can all meet what you need. And then you have a bid price there, and then you just hold them to that. So multiple ways of doing it, but definitely in this type of scenario, scope creep can be a serious issue, 100%.
Thanks, Jason. Nadine, Claudine, quelque chose à ajouter?
Ben, tu sais, on parle beaucoup de oui, mais j'ai l'impression que mes coûts vont augmenter, mais d'un autre côté, on arrête, tu sais, dans ces cas-là, on n'enferme pas les fournisseurs dans des activités prédéterminées. Fait en leur donnant l'espace pour proposer des nouvelles approches, des nouvelles technologies, des nouveaux modèles de prestations, tu sais, Guylaine parle beaucoup, tu sais, d'innovation. On n'est pas 100% au courant de ce que l'industrie peut nous offrir afin d'atteindre le résultat. Donc, en leur laissant cette flexibilité-là, ben, en fait, il y a peut-être une possibilité que ça va coûter moins cher, surtout que là, avec l'intelligence artificielle, peut-être qu'au lieu de leur prendre, si on avait fait un task-base, ça leur aurait pris 30 heures au lieu de 50 heures. Donc, on parle beaucoup de ça va me coûter plus cher, mais j'ai l'impression que des fois, on oublie que ça se peut aussi que ça coûte moins cher. Donc, en tout cas, je voulais juste amener ça sur la table.
Merci, Claudine. Nadine, quelque chose à ajouter?
Non.
C'est bien. Okay. So next question here is let's talk about risk. So there's risk in 2 perspectives. Risk of trying something new for departments, right? And we talked about your advice and guidance of going down a new method of procurement. But also the question here is asked, and I'll read it because it's risk on the outcomes. So in your experience, are outcome-based procurements actually reducing the risk to the Crown or just redistributing it in ways that are harder to manage and enforce? So I'd like your opinions on, what does that do to risk to the Crown for outcomes-based?
Je peux peut-être commencer. Je pense que
Claudine.
ça va être extrêmement important, dans le fond, d'avoir des indicateurs de performance qui ne font pas seulement confirmer les résultats, à la fin, mais qui nous permettent de réagir rapidement en cas de problème pour justement pouvoir ajuster le tir là, avant que ça dérape. Donc, c'est une des choses qu'il faut qu'on devienne de plus en plus confortable à utiliser. Puis, une des choses que le Centre national d'expertise va publier sur Canada Buy dans les prochaines semaines, c'est une librairie de standards, puis de normes et d'indicateurs pour que justement les acheteurs et les propriétaires fonctionnels deviennent plus confortables avec ce principe-là.
Merci, Claudine. Anybody else want to talk about risk and their perception of risk reduction?
Yeah, I've raised my
Okay,
hand.
sorry. Go ahead, Jason.
So definitely, there's always going to be risk. Moving, regardless of what you do, definitely there's still risk with outcomes based. And I think without risk, there's no reward. And people, I've always been told in procurement, you got to try new things. Yeah, you might fail here or there, but you need to move the bar forward. But one of the key things to reduce that risk overall, and Claudine touched on this, is you start small. You do iterative approaches to it. You bring them in, they provide a solution, you start small, prove it can work, and then expand it. So that reduces your risk down to a small section or a small area. And yeah, things could go wrong, but you're going to learn from that. You course correct, you pivot, and you move on. And then as you know it works, then you grow it, and the risk reduces along the way. So that's the key to outcome based for me.
Excellent. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, we'll move on to the next question. One that I want to highlight here because it really speaks to the audience that we have here. We're procurement professionals. We're in a learning environment. So I'm going to ask the panelists here. I'll read the question. What are the key skills and changes needed for procurement professionals when managing outcome-based procurement? What programs have you found best to help staff make this transition? So let's talk about our audience here. What skills or changes do they need to implement to do this?
J'ai une question.
Oui, Guylaine, vas-y.
Est-ce que je pourrais répondre à la question d'avant?
Oui, on va répondre celle-là, puis peux-tu revenir à celle-là? On va faire celle-là. Okay. All right. So let's stick with the current question, then we'll go back to Guylaine. What skills do we think our procurement community needs and to implement outcome-based procurement?
I can start.
Okay, Guylaine, go.
Since I was there. So I think we need a good understanding of the capacity to find the flexibility within the rules. You need to understand, okay, this is within the trade agreement's obligation or discipline. You need to know what you can do to faut que tu sois capable de comprendre comment étirer l'élastique. Hein? Qu'est-ce que tu peux faire? We need to get some dare to think outside of the box. OK, on pense. Mais une affaire que je trouve, moi, que ça prend pour faire ça, c'est du monde qui drive. Des gens qui sont capables d'embarquer dans des équipes puis qui challenge l'autorité technique. The capacity to push back on your technical people is a key element. It's not coming overnight. You form a team, you engage, you build the trust. You showcase, you demonstrate your value added. After that, they trust you, then you can challenge them. To the example of Jason about 100 evaluation criteria, si tu es un nobody, tu ne peux pas faire ça. Ben là, ils ne t'écouteront peut-être pas. Mais si tu vas arriver et tu vas dire, ils ont confiance en toi, puis tu dis, voici comment on peut faire ça. Mais ça va te donner plus que ce que tu veux. So to me, it's a key element of what we need is understanding the boundaries of trade agreement disciplines and the courage to push back in an articulated way.
Merci, Guylaine. Well said. Anybody else, colleagues, wants to add to this?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And to be honest, it's not something I've thought about too much. I know for my teams, we encourage it and engage different officers. We actually hold an open invitation for officers to join a new team working on a big project, and so they can be engaged in it and learn by doing. I'm not sure if there's formal training. I think there should be. We have training for multiple different types of procurement approaches. Outcome-based should be on there. But I'd say failing that, give him Guylain's number and have him give her a call.
So one of the requirements is having Guylain's number on your Rolodex. Or actually, I dated myself again. What is it? Most people might not know what a Rolodex is. OK. Anything else, collègue? Autre chose à ajouter?
Oui, mais un peu comme pour revenir à ce que Jason disait, offrir l'opportunité de faire des affectations entre ministères, mais justement pour offrir cette expérience-là, pas juste 6 mois, là. Envoyez-les pour 1 an. Mais je pense que du départ, il faut que tu aies, faut que la personne, comme l'agent d'approvisionnement, le professionnel, comme il faut qu'il y ait une ouverture d'esprit pour challenger le statu quo. Tu sais, comme d'avoir le mindset de toujours, ben je l'ai toujours fait de même. Oui, mais pourquoi tu l'as toujours fait comme ça? Comme il y a différentes façons, puis il faut voir d'autres choses. Je pense que c'est le premier critère que je voudrais voir dans un agent d'approvisionnement, c'était cette ouverture d'esprit-là.
Si je peux me permettre,
Oui,
Daniel,
Guylaine.
J'ai ma gestionnaire sur l'appel ici, elle s'appelle Cadici, justement, Agile, puis on a une expression qu'on dit, nous autres, notre job, là, c'est pas put, c'est go, go, go. Fait qu'il y a vraiment cette énergie-là dans travailler puis driver des initiatives pour respecter notre parole. Tu dis que tu vas livrer ça à cette date, tu livres ça. Tu travailles la fin de semaine, so bad. Tu sais, ça fait partie un peu de cette promesse que tu as à ton équipe multifonctionnelle.
Ça revient à la crédibilité aussi, là, tes commentaires, là, originalement, c'est bâtir ta crédibilité avec le client, puis ça augmente ta capacité de faire un certain pushback, de faire un challenge function, où est-ce que tu es respecté, ton opinion a de la valeur. Super bien. Puis, listen, colleagues, based on the comments that we're seeing there and the hearts and the applause, I think we all agree on what you're saying. As far as what the procurement community could do. And look at this, it's a love fest going on right now. Okay, well, let's go back to the question that Guylaine wanted to answer, which is one I had skipped over because I'm trying to do a variety. But I'm going to read the question here, which is, if we accept that apples to apples comparison don't really exist in outcome-based procurement, how do we design evaluation frameworks that are still transparent, defensible under trade agreements, and able to withstand scrutiny from the Canadian International Trade Tribunal?
Thank you. So I really want to address this one because that actually is one of the aha moments on the big complex procurement that we just completed with success. Is this thing. I'm not saying that you cannot compare apple and apple. That stays. Trade agreement discipline say are you going to be evaluating and evaluate the way you said that in your solicitation. That stays. So the non-discrimination and the article of trade agreements that says that you must disclose your criteria, the weight of those criteria, that stays. And it's still a procurement. But we push that and say, and one on the solicitation I just completed, we were having this example. I said, I want them to give the best value for Canada, the best price value. So, okay, so discount, blah, blah, blah. And I said, okay, what is if they want, the 4 vendors, if they want to offer us additional benefits, but not the same? Moi, je voulais que ces grosses multinationales-là m'offrent au Canada tout ce qu'ils voulaient, n'importe quoi, en sachant que ce ne serait pas la meilleure affaire. Ça ne serait pas la même affaire. A ne va pas offrir la même affaire. Comment je fais ça d'une façon qui respecte les accords de commerce? And this is how we did it. We designed a set of rules about what parameters the benefits would be assessed. This must be objective, quantifiable. So we had the procedural rules. We set up pre-bids. So we don't want you to provide us your price. Provide you what would be your benefits, and we will validate your benefits. So les règles procédurales, le pré-bid, ils viennent, les experts techniques parlent, ils clarifient, OK, ça, c'est un bénéfice qui est acceptable, ça, ce ne l'est pas. Il y a de la rétroaction. À la fin de ça, les bénéfices sont validés. Et après ça, at bid closing, ils donnent un prix à ça. So, see, the total value would be comparable, but the granularity of how we get to that value is different. That's why I'm saying apple and oranges, because the content will be different, but after that, it's still comparable additional benefits to Canada.
Merci, Guylaine. Anything else, colleagues?
Yeah, that's 100% one way of doing it. There's never a single way of accomplishing a goal. There's multiple ways of getting it done. GPS even offers you multiple routes wherever you're going. So there's different ways to get there. For me, as long as you put out your 4 or 5 high level requirements, if they come in, they do a demo, they meet it, well, then you should be happy with any of those vendors. Now, if one is faster or more efficient, less downtime, stuff like that, they get extra points. But ultimately, if those are your needs, those are your objectives, if they all meet it, well, then you can move to a price competition. So I feel that it's not really apples to oranges. It's not exactly the same solution or way of doing it, but it's all competitive, and you can pick the best one that way, either through additional rated points for better performance or go down to a price comparison.
Thanks, Jason. We're almost running out of time here, so let's try to be efficient on some questions. One of the questions here from an anonymous person, Mr. or Mrs. Anonymous. They specifically asked, and I think this is geared towards departments that have never done this before, that the outcome-based procurement is new. They're saying, is there any way to obtain like examples of outcome-based procurement? And in the existing mandatory tools like SBIPs, they don't necessarily provide the guidance on how we can implement outcome-based procurements. So for those larger departments that have implemented outcome-based procurement, do you have samples or anything? Is there like some kind of like, do you have a training regime that you have in place? Do you have guidance that you provide your officers? And do you have something that you could share with the greater community, either through CPM or a learning event later on? So putting you on the spot here, does anyone have anything that they can share?
Maybe I start.
Okay, go ahead, Guylaine. Go ahead.
No, vas-y.
PSPC has a National Center of Expertise for the procurement of professional services, and we will make available in the next few weeks on Canada Buy a playbook, which is going to support with the transition from task-based to solution-based. So it's not gonna rewrite the statement of work. It's really just like tool that's gonna support business owner and procurement officer and give them, something to better understand how to write what they need. And so that's one thing. Second thing, we also are going to have to give presentations to individual departments. So depending, it's going to start over the summer. So you're going to hear from us at some point. And we have started having those sessions depending on the needs. And we will also be at CPM at the national workshop, and we will have a concurrent session on outcome-based, but also a workshop to develop our skills on how to write an outcome-based statement of work. So, I would say maybe, reach out to us. We will find the best way to meet your needs.
Merci, Claudine. I'm certain that all departments would appreciate guidance from the lead. PSPC, you are everybody's big brother. So we would really appreciate those guidance document, and that guide that you're going to be publishing in a couple of weeks would be really, really helpful. So anybody else have anything that they would want to share, or examples or something that they could speak to?
So I think for our SSC, we have a center of expertise in agile procurement. So it's like a subset of outcome-based, like I explained, but we can definitively give the coordinate of, and there's a lot of training material available there.
Excellent. Okay. Super. Let's just wrap up here with one last question. And this is a bit of on the fly, but there's a lot of questions in the chat, but what are the pitfalls? So honestly, let's be honest, what are the challenges and pitfalls of going to objective-based procurement? Alors, parlons des défis. Juste vite fait, dernier commentaire ou avis que vous auriez au ministère ici qui participe sur qu'est-ce qu'on veut éviter? C'est quoi les périls qu'on veut éviter? So I'm going to open up to the general panel for your advice in there.
maybe I'll
Moi, juste
start.
Go ahead, Jason.
Okay. Yeah, admittedly, it's much harder to do something new and novel. It takes a lot more upfront work, engagement, thought, planning. So it is more difficult in the start, but short-term pain for long-term gain, and that's our view on it. But it definitely it's doing a shift. It's getting all that alignment, all that support. It's definitely harder to get those up and running and do something new. So sometimes it's just easier to do the same old thing. Maybe you give in sometimes, but at some point you got to say, hey, let's do the right thing. Let's do the optimal thing. So I suggest you put in the time and effort to move to outcome based where it's applicable.
La seule
Excellent.
chose que je voulais
Oui, vas-y.
mentionner, c'était étant donné qu'on a tellement été habitués à faire la majorité de notre approvisionnement sur du task-based, surtout au niveau là, du IT Professional Services, ça serait de ne pas tenter de déguiser du staff augmentation dans un outcome-based SAM. Juste parce que justement, c'est nos souliers confortables, c'est nos pantoufles. Donc, c'est ça, ça serait vraiment la chose que j'espère que les gens vont garder en tête.
Merci. Nadine, quelque chose à ajouter?
Juste, faut être prête à, comme, à ne pas réussir, dans le fond. Il faut avoir cette confiance-là que c'est correct de faire des erreurs puis d'apprendre de ça. Je pense que ce serait la première chose que je dirais.
Merci. Guylaine, dernier mot avis ou recommandations?
OK, je ne suis pas obligée de parler des risques. Non.
Oh, si tu veux, tu as le
OK.
dernier mot.
Si j'ai le dernier mot, je vais te dire que outcome-based procurement and agile procurement could be passionating. What I want to say is procurement could be boring or not. And it's a question about how you invest and how you try to exercise your creativity in the way you configure the procurement. We design a new function. I call that a procurement strategist, a procurement architect. At the outset, you dream the ideal contract with your technical authority, and as an expert in procurement, you configure all this. So you're no longer as somebody that is expert at applying templates, you become a procurement architect. And I think it's the true promise of agile and outcome-based procurement, in my view.
Merci. Okay, colleagues, merci beaucoup. Colleagues, thank you very much. You've shown yourself to be the wise panelists on the mountain. We've gotten your insight. Thank you very much for the advice, the guidance, and your shared knowledge and experience. With that, it's been a pleasure to host. J'ai eu beaucoup de plaisir d'avoir cette discussion avec vous. Et je vais maintenant remettre la parole à mon collègue Minkai pour fermer la session. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Dan. As we approach 1:30 p.m., and I'm mindful that many of you have commitment immediately following this session, so I'm going to try to keep this brief. So a sincere thanks to you, Dan, and a round of applause to Dan, our moderators, and our panelists, Guylaine, Nadine, Claudine, and Jason, for sharing such a thoughtful, insightful, and inspiring perspectives today. Thank you as well to all of you participants for your presence and engagement. So many points and valuable insight were shared throughout the discussion. So on behalf of CIPIN and our panel, we wish you a very wonderful rest of the day, and we look forward to welcoming you again at our next CIPIN event. Un grand plaisir, un grand merci à Dan et à nos panélistes, Guylaine, Nadine, Claudine et Jason. Au nom de l'IKGM, nous vous souhaitons une excellente fin de journée et avons hâte de vous retrouver lors de notre prochain événement de l'IKGM. Merci. Bonne journée.